Hi everyone, my name's Camille. I'm non-binary, I use they them pronouns, and I'm also an opera singer. Today, I want you to think about your dream role. If you're a performer of any kind, I think we all have that role that we dream about playing, even if we know it's probably never gonna happen. But I want to ask the question, what if your dream role is a different gender than your own? Do you still think you could play that character? Do you think you would ever be cast? Would you even audition? So why do we find the line between a character's gender and an actor's gender such a hard line to cross? After all, actors are almost never asked to play a character who has exactly the same life experiences as them. They might play a character from a different place or even a different time period. They will very often be asked to play a character with a different profession, because not every play or movie can be about actors. So actors are used to having to do a lot of research to properly get to know a character. For example, someone like Natalie Portman had to learn ballet so she could play a ballerina in Black Swan. But it's very rare that an actor will play a character of a different gender from their own. So why does gender seem like such a barrier? Even just recently, we saw how big a deal it was for Harry Styles to wear a dress on the cover of Vogue. Why is it accepted for an actor to play a character that has a totally different life story from their own, but not for them to play a character of a different gender? I think it's important to ask this question because even though we take this taboo for granted now, there's actually a long history of actors playing characters of different genders. We see this in almost all cultures throughout history. Western European theater, many women played male roles, mostly because historically, male roles were more fulfilling than female characters, who often did a lot of kind of boring languishing. For example, there's a long history of famous actresses playing the lead role in Hamlet, and this started as early as the 1700s. Today, this has mostly fallen out of practice, especially in TV and movies. This is most likely because casting across gender lines goes against the aesthetic values of realism, which is actually a fairly recent development. What we think of as modern realism only appeared in theater in the late 1800s at the earliest. Today, the vast majority of movies use a fairly realist aesthetic, and theater has in many ways followed this trend, at least when it comes to casting strategies. Today, actors generally play characters whose gender matches their own, and it's considered exceptional when an actor plays a character of a different gender. The only really famous example I can think of is Nancy Cartwright, who has been the voice of Bart SIMPSON for 30 years.
Your attention, please. Your attention, please. I have an announcement to make.
So what does this have to do with opera? In opera, there is also a long history of people playing characters of different genders. There's a whole tradition of male roles written for treble singers, so that means singers who sing in a high range. Sometimes, especially when these characters are boys or young men, they were written for and premiered by women. This was the case with characters like Cherubino in The Marriage of Figaro or Hansel in Hansel and Gretel. But sometimes a high voice was also used for the main male hero. An example of this would be the main character in Handel's opera Rinaldo. These roles were usually written for castrati. So who were the castrati? Most simply, they were boys who were castrated before their voices changed, so that their singing voices would stay in a high range. This seems really strange to us today, but the castrati were the superstar singers in the 1600s and 1700s. They were known for having amazing, flexible voices with huge ranges. And the music that was written for them is so hard that very few singers today can attempt it. One of the challenging things about casting operas is that the roles a person can play are limited by their voice type, which refers mostly to the range of notes a person can sing, but also the tone or quality of their voice. For example, I'm a mezzo, which means I have a medium high voice, not as high as soprano, not as low as an alto. Because of my voice type, I actually have played a lot of male characters, roles like Cherubino and Hansel. I've also played a character named Tarinto in an opera by Handel, and that's one of those roles that was written for a castrato. Playing Cherubino was actually pretty important to me starting to discover my gender. I had just turned 20 and I hadn't really figured much out about my gender identity yet. Cherubino was my first full opera role. If you don't know the opera, Cherubino is kind of an annoying, overactive teenage boy, which is a super fun character to play. I remember looking in a mirror at the dress rehearsal. It was the first time I was in full costume, hair, and makeup, and I remember really liking how I looked. Like, I really liked it. But I clearly remember thinking, okay, I don't know what this means, so I'm just gonna file this away and deal with it later. And eventually I did, and came out as non-binary a couple of years later. But that was a pretty formative moment for me. So it's been very fulfilling for me to play characters of lots of different genders. At this point in my career, I've played about half and half female and male characters. Occasionally, I even get to play a non-binary character, which is the best. I do think my experience being a non-binary person and playing characters of lots of different genders gives me a really unique perspective. I get to experiment with embodying different characters across the gender spectrum. And for myself, I love the freedom it's given me to explore my relationship with all sorts of gender expressions. I've played characters everywhere from super feminine to masculine and everything in between. Something I find really interesting is that people from the audience will often come up to me and are amazed at how convincing I am at playing a boy, which I think is hilarious because actually I'm even better at pretending to be a girl. I did it for the first 20 years of my life. And for me, dressing up in a big long wig and a fancy dress actually feels much more like drag than traditionally masculine clothes. But either way, I love putting on makeup and costumes and transforming into a totally different person. So by now, you might be able to understand why my experiences make me wonder why we still have so many barriers when it comes to playing characters of genders different from our own. Because it's obviously possible. I do it all the time. Before I wrap up, I want to comment briefly on the issue of cisgender people, so non-trans people, playing trans characters. This is very much a different topic, and the choice of who to cast in a trans role holds a lot more weight because of a long history of really problematic portrayals of trans people in all sorts of media. Casting a cis person in a trans role can be harmful in a few ways. First, it perpetuates the misconception that trans people are really just like cis people but somehow in disguise. It can also perpetuate stereotypical narratives of trans people only becoming real once they go through certain elements of physical transition and are able to pass as cisgender. It's so important to acknowledge trans people's validity no matter where they are in their transition. Not all trans people can or want to physically transition, and that should not be a prerequisite of having their gender respected. So all that to say, it's really never appropriate to cast a cis actor in a trans role because of the long history of trans people being erased from our own stories. So I hope you've enjoyed listening, and I encourage you to join me in imagining a world where we could all explore gender a little more freely, including on the stage. Is there a character of a different gender from your own that you would like to play? Would you change how you dress, move, walk, sit, or speak? How and why? Think about it.
Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe for more Opera InReach. If you want to learn more about my work, you can visit my website, camillerogers.ca, or find me on social media at camillerogers.sa.